Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are so thrilled that you are choosing to invest an hour of your day in learning with us. We anticipate an amazing conversation today with these two wonderful authors and experts, Roxy Manning and Sarah Peyton. So as you're coming into the Zoom webinar, we hope that you'll take a moment and let us know in the chat where you are calling in from today. And if you happen to be representing your organization and attending this event as part of your professional development, we'd love to have you tell the name of your organization so we can give you a shout out. So welcome in Massachusetts, Washington, Buenos Aires, Portland, Maine. Hello. Hello in Lubbock, Texas, North Carolina. Wow, this is fast. It looks like France, Richmond, California, San Francisco Bay Area, Iowa. So one of the notes I want to give you is that if you can use the drop-down menu to select everyone, then everyone can see your comments. At Weaving Influence, one of the things that we hope to do is fuel an inclusive community. So in the event that using the closed captions would be of help to your learning today, we would invite you to go ahead and turn on the captions for the duration of the event. And we also want to welcome you at any time during today's event to type your questions, comments, and other thoughts into the chat. We want to see you all engage with one another. Sometimes our webinar attendees will drop their LinkedIn profile links in so that they can connect in community outside of our events, and we welcome you to do that as well. We are going to have a conversation today, and then we are going to shift to some live Q&A toward the end of the hour. So thanks to all of you who are saying hello in the chat. It looks like we do have an international audience. I see someone is calling in from Uganda, someone from Palestine, and the organization in Palestine is Open Edge Transforming Conflict, which is based in the UK. We have folks in the Netherlands, in lots of different states in the US, someone from Manitoba, Canada from Facilitated Solutions, someone from Christchurch, New Zealand, and I don't even want to venture what time it is in New Zealand right now, so thank you for being here with us. So before we get too far, I want to let you know a couple of exciting things. So one of the reasons why we're having today's webinar event is in preparation for the launch of two books from Roxy and from Sarah. The first one is called How to Have Antiracist Conversations, Embracing Our Full Humanity to Challenge White Supremacy. And the second book is The Antiracist Heart, a Self-Compassion and Activism Handbook. And both of those books will launch next week on August 29th. And we'll tell you later on how you can get some special deals if you want to buy both books together. But before we go any further, I want to take a moment to introduce Roxy Manning. Roxy is a clinical psychologist and certified Center for Nonviolent Communication trainer. And since 2004, she has operated a private consulting business and regularly holds international workshops and intensives centered around nonviolent communication and social change issues. Roxy has served as the executive director of the Bay Area Nonviolent Communication and focuses her outside efforts on working with the homeless in San Francisco. Sarah is a neuroscience educator and a certified trainer of nonviolent communication by the Center for Nonviolent Communication, and she teaches and shares her thought leadership throughout the world and is the author of several other books, including Your Resonant Self Workbook, and Affirmations for Turbulent Times. So I cannot wait to learn from the two of you. So hello.
Hey.
We would love to get a pulse on your thoughts on today's topic. So I have a couple of polls that we're going to seek your feedback on, and I'm so anxious to get your feedback. So the first one is about speaking up. So when is the last time you struggled with speaking up when faced with a difficult situation? And you need to choose one. So did you struggle with that today? Did you struggle with that this week? Or did you struggle with that last month? And please feel free to put any additional comments in the chat. We're going to leave that open for a few moments. So thanks to those of you who are responding to the poll. Tell me about this question, Sarah and Roxy. Why is this question important to today's conversation?
This is a fabulous question for all of us because this is where we end up as bystanders to things that feel not so good to us in terms of relationships between different groups of people. So when we hear something that we don't enjoy, do we feel authorized? Do we have the skills and abilities to be able to speak up?
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm going to close the poll And it looks like those who are responding, some 6% of you have struggled with speaking up even today. Many of you, more than half of you, have struggled with speaking up this week. And it looks like the remainder have had some struggles. And I hope by the end of the hour today, we'll have some new tools to be able to speak up when we hear things that make us uncomfortable. Okay, so I'm going to seek your input on one more poll before we dive into today's conversation. Just give me 1 second. So here we go. Is it hard for you to have self-compassion? So how hard is it to have self-compassion when you wish you had acted differently in a situation where you could have spoken up about something that made you uncomfortable? So is it easy for you to have self-compassion? Is it a struggle for you to be compassionate with yourself when you don't make the choice you wish you had made? Or is it impossible for you to have self-compassion? So I'm curious to hear from the two of you. What have you seen in those groups that you've worked with about this area of self-compassion?
Well, I think self-compassion is one of the hardest things for so many of us because many of us have internalized kind of a dominant cultural edict of you're either horrible or you're great. And so when we do something wrong, we have no choice but to go, that must mean I'm horrible. And especially when we start talking about anti-racism, people get frozen because they think if I discover I've made a mistake that's racist, it must mean I'm the worst person ever. So it's one of the places where if we can transform people's relationship to self-compassion, they'll have more access to being able to show up for these conversations, including the difficult ones that they talked about earlier.
Thank you for that, Roxy. So let me give you a look at these results. 3/4 of you struggle to have self-compassion in these moments, and 4% of you think it's impossible to have self-compassion. So thank you so much for sharing your input. Throughout today's event, we're going to welcome your comments, your questions. And so as we dive in today, I would love to hear from you, Roxy. What led you to practicing nonviolent communication and dedicating yourself to this important work that you're doing in the world?
Oh, great question. Part of the challenge for me is some of the things we were just talking about. I was always kind of the good girl, overachiever, doing all of the things that I thought would buy me belonging, especially in the community that didn't always see me as a Black person. What I wasn't skilled at was being able to understand what did I need in any situation. I was always focused on how do I take care of other people? How do I show them that I have values so that I could belong? And so nonviolent communication became my access into realizing that, hey, I actually also matter. I need to be part of this equation if we're going to have kind of change in the world. And then I had children and I realized I absolutely didn't want my children to have the patterns that I had learned, even though they had been quite functional. And I also didn't want that for any other child. So I started learning and embracing nonviolent communication, both to liberate myself from these old patterns and also to be able to model for my kids what was possible. And then I discovered that because of my interest in anti-racism, a lot of people were struggling with that. And learning how nonviolent communication intersects with anti-racism brought like a really fresh breath into the field. It gave me a lot of possibilities and hope.
Wow, that is so powerful, Roxy, of wanting to create a world that's better for everyone, including your children and including yourself. So I'm curious to hear the backstory on Roxy, how you and Sarah connected. And Sarah, if you would tell us, how did you connect with Roxy and how did you decide that you would partner together to share this important work with the world?
Well, Roxy and I are both teachers of nonviolent communication and both kind of started out at the same time and watched each other developing in our very different ways. And I found Roxy's work so moving and so important. And I really wanted her to have a book. And over the years, I would say, why don't you write a book? Why don't you write a book? And she would say, oh, in her very modest Roxy way, she'd say, oh, yes, that would be a good idea. And finally, I was like, the whole world was breaking open with Black Lives Matter. And also Roxy and I were in this interesting dialogue with our nonviolent communication community about racism and about the way that racism impacts people. And I was like, we need to write a book. So I called her up and I said, Roxy, we need to write a book. Well, I really want to write a book with you. And I want it to be about self-compassion and anti-racism, because there's like so little compassion and so little self-compassion, even in our beloved nonviolent communication community. And Roxy said, well, that would be very interesting, but I would like to have my own book first, which made total sense to me. Yeah. So then we began our journey of like, well, let's see if we can sell it a package of the book that I wanted, which was the Antiracist Heart, which Roxy also wanted, but to also bring Roxy's voice and work into the world, because her work is stunningly beautiful.
And I'd love to add a little bit to that if I can, because Sarah touched on it. But I think it's important to name that I had always hesitated to write a book. And I talk about this in Antiracist Conversations, but I had this really traumatic experience with writing. And so the idea of writing something and putting it out there and being judged by people was just terrifying to me. So every time I trained, people would say, where's your book? And I would say, one of these days. So it was really important to have Sarah and so many people keep saying, we want your book. Trust us, it's going to be okay. And I was also aware that if I had done just a book with Sarah, because Sarah's already published and because she's white, I think a lot of people would have said, oh, this is Sarah's book that Roxy's helping with. And it felt really important to me that I do my own book first, so that I could stand on my own merit before I did a joint book. And it was really like, when we talk about difficult conversations, telling Sarah that, like, I like you, but I got to do my own book first, felt really hard. And Sarah embraced it and said, okay, do both. Let's make it happen. Really important.
Well, anyone who's written a book knows how much work it is. So to do two at once is pretty incredible.
I
was
crazy. I didn't know.
I had faith because Roxy's ideas are so crystalline and clear. I had this faith that once she opened the floodgates, it would just rush out.
Yeah, that is so amazing. And I'm seeing in the chat, someone is saying so much bravery there, Roxy. So Roxy, talk to us a little bit more about why you wrote this book, The Antiracist Heart. So I'm getting confused between the two books. I'm sure our listeners are as well. So tell us about the solo book that you wrote and what the concept and inspiration is behind the solo book.
So the solo book is How to Have Antiracist Conversations. And I wanted to write this book because I had been doing so many work for decades in anti-racism, helping people, helping organizations have these conversations, helping people in communities that were struggling have these conversations. And one of the challenges that I kept running into was that for a lot of people, having these conversations meant that it had to be like good or bad. I had to put you down. I had to call you out and tell you were wrong, evil, etc. And especially as cancel culture started to arise, people were really frozen. It's like, I can't even begin to have these conversations because it might mean if I admit that I did something wrong, I'm no longer in my community, or people are really going to demonize me. And I wanted to bring in all of the things that I saw nonviolent communication offering, and also what King in Nonviolence offered, that these conversations are necessary. We can have them. We can go for positive peace, making sure that we kind of fiercely name when things are not working, but doing it in a way that still sees the person who's doing harm as somebody who belongs in our community, somebody that we can support to learn how to be different. That felt really important to me. And the other piece that was really crucial was I wanted to make sure it wasn't just about, we're going to talk and I'm going to tell you what didn't work, and then nothing ever happens. So the books are really around, this is just the beginning of necessary action. These conversations are crucial to have action, and having action that's grounded in how can we bring people together is really the essence of why I wanted to write these books, to show what was possible.
So that's amazing. And the thing that is standing out for me is the book is the beginning, but it has to be followed by doing something about it.
Absolutely. Otherwise, it's just, what a lot of global majority folks have said over and over and over again, like, people are willing to talk to us and they'll talk to us as long as we're willing to talk with them, but nothing ever changes. And so we actually need to have real change.
Yeah, that is really powerful and clear. And so I want to shift for a moment and ask Sarah a little bit about this idea of self-compassion. So how are self-compassion and anti-racism connected?
Well, I love it that Roxy brought out the rising of cancel culture, because so many folks that I know who have been long-term interested in anti-racism came into this last decade of increasing consciousness and awareness of the I have this image in my head of like a cellular matrix that's got white supremacy kind of woven into it. Like, as we become more and more aware of the way that whiteness has traditionally been centered, then there's an entire sort of a thought body that's come up that helps us to see those moments of unconscious microaggressions and structurally racist actions and assumptions. And as we step into this, the person who's had the most privilege in any society that's stepping into these changes, it's like the ground is exploding under us, because this thought body is so important and it's rising, and we're like, oh no, I don't know my way, I'm wrong. And this is just from the white perspective for anti-racism. The book is actually, because of Roxy's participation, and this was so important, the book is actually really inclusive of the global majority's experience as well. And the global majority, if you don't know, is a phrase that Roxy has brought to this community. And I'll have her speak about the origins of that phrase and define it in just a moment. So in order to keep going, in order to learn the thought body, in order to begin to see the matrix, we need to be holding ourselves with immense self-compassion. And for folks in the global majority, there's an exhaustion. I mean, folks have been working on getting this to be seen and visible and known. And people are tired. So self-compassion is really needed for everybody as we're working on this stuff. Roxy, would you be willing to just say those few words about global majority?
Sure. So the global majority is a phrase that brilliant thinker Rosemary Campbell Stevens from the UK and the Bahamas coined. And it's meant to have this little tiny challenge to white supremacy thinking. So instead of, in the United States, we call people of color minorities. And that term actually hides the fact that people of color actually represent people who identify as Black, Brown, Asian, African, Latino, Indigenous to the Global South, represent 85% of the world population. So why are we calling them minorities? So it's another way that language helps to keep people subservient, keep them less than. And so the phrase global majority is meant to reclaim the kind of standing in the world of people from these groups. And I love the term because I do a lot of international work, and in every country I go into, there's a different term, like BAMI in the UK instead of BIPOC, and lots of different challenges with some of these terms. And people of the global majority tends to be a pretty neutral term.
Yeah, that's a really helpful term, actually, and eye-opening. That 85% of the people in the world, which would be the global majority, are people of color.
Right, and that we call them minorities.
Yeah, that's huge. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm learning right along with all of you today, so thank you for that, Roxy. Let's talk about what we need to be thinking about if we do want to choose to enter anti-racist dialogue. And I mean, I'm even aware here as a white woman and a person who has had a lot of privilege of, I don't even want to say the wrong thing in this conversation. So what are those thoughts and attitudes that we need to bring if we want to enter into these spaces? Roxy.
Yeah, so there are a number of things that we need to bring. The first one is just humility, recognizing that you're not going to get it right. I don't get it right, There's no like magic, like I can learn or I can read the right book and all of a sudden I've got all the wisdom and I'll never make a mistake. So acknowledging that I'm going to make a mistake, that I don't understand everything that's happening in the world. I can only understand things from the perspective I have, but I can let myself be open to someone saying, hey, there is something you're not seeing. Pay attention here. Really, really important. So humility, understanding that we are limited in the perspectives that we're able to see, and then a willingness to show up for dialogue. I think that's the most important thing that we can do. If someone tells you that you did something that had an impact, to be able to say, hey, tell me more, right? Not, wait a second, you didn't understand me. That's a huge thing. Just that, tell me more, tell me more. And even when I say that, understanding that the person might say, I don't want to tell you more, go find someone else who can tell you more because I'm exhausted, and that's okay too. I also think that the other things that we need to have to be able to have these dialogues, a huge invitation I have to folks from the global majority is discernment. You don't have to have every single one of these dialogues every time something happens, because that's how we burn out. That's when we feel hopeless. So being able to assess, is this the right time for me? Is this serving me, or is it something that I think I need to do, or that I feel compelled or coerced to do? Being able to ascertain, do I have the resources that I need in order to have these dialogues, are all important things. And if we can all slow down, get rid of urgency, and check in. What do I need to have an effective dialogue? And then show up with humility. It goes really well.
That word humility is key, to be sure. So Sarah, let's talk for a moment. You mentioned that these unconscious biases that we have, that we can't even see what we can't see. So can you tell us a bit more about these unconscious contracts and how they block us?
Yes, of course. One of the things that the brain does is it tries to protect us from shame and humiliation. And the way that it does that is it notices whatever it is that we are up against, and remembers everything about the moment that was shaming or difficult, the moment of figuring out that we've taken a wrong step, or that this is from the perspective of whiteness, but from the perspective of the global majority, these kinds of contracts also happen. Like, I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm not going to waste my life energy anymore. I'm done. Like, there can be these kinds of contracts which end up kind of being the same. I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm not going to talk anymore. That are natural. They come from our human brain's desire to save us. And it can be that we have more energy, more resources than we had when we first made these contracts. We could have made these contracts starting when we were very small. We could have made these contracts without even realizing the amount of resource that we have. So they might not be life-serving anymore. First of all, we don't know about them. They prohibit us from expression. They prohibit us from action. They prohibit us from participation. They prohibit us from finding community. We don't even know about them, and they impact us. But as we begin to say, oh, it's possible that I've made this agreement with myself that I don't really need, that actually I get to learn from Roxy. I get to learn how to begin to talk about these difficult things, like in our first poll. And so maybe I can let go of these unconscious contracts and let myself struggle and try a little more, no matter where I'm coming from along the spectrum of impact. Yeah.
What would you add, Roxy?
Nothing in this moment. Nothing in this moment.
Okay. So raising our level of awareness and giving ourselves permission to try to do something different. So Roxy, can we talk a little bit about beloved community? Maybe if you define that first, and then I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, I love that. I feel soft whenever I hear the term. So when I think about beloved community, it's a phrase that I've adopted from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And there's always a hesitation to talk about it because people think that I'm now talking about the overly sanitized version of his work, which is, like, oh, we're all going to be peace and light and wonderful. And that's not at all what it means. What it means is creating a world where everybody has what they need to thrive and a world that's grounded in positive peace. And what we mean by positive peace, he tells this, really great stories around, like for instance, when they wanted to integrate those colleges in Alabama, and a lot of white folks were saying, like, why are you even trying to do this? You're the reason why we're having so much struggle. You're the reason why we're so upset about this. And if you would just stop trying to integrate, we would have peace. Everything would be lovely. And it's like, no, that's not actually peace. That's submission and quiet. And you might feel peaceful, but my needs are still not met. And instead, we're going for positive peace, where we keep speaking up, we keep agitating for a world where all of our needs could be met, where we see each other as family. I think of beloved community as family, where I might have family members who do things I don't like, but I'm not going to throw them away. I'm going to tell them about it. I'm going to keep staying in dialogue with them because I want them to thrive just as much as I want to have my needs met. So beloved community is seeing the entire planet as part of our family and being invested in having the difficult conversations, having the positive peace, having the painful conversations that we need in order for your needs and my needs to be met and held with care.
So I'm curious about this idea, though, that I've heard about how this idea of beloved community can just be another way to try to get the global community to comply. So can you react to that?
Well, yes, and that's exactly what I was saying, right? Like when I think about beloved community, it means I am going to be a pain in your rear because the idea of beloved community is that my needs are met and your needs are met. So if you think that beloved community means I'm going to be quiet and you're going to get what you want and I don't get my needs met, then you're wrong. Beloved community means that I am aware of what's missing for me. I'm aware of the fact that a lot of global majority children don't have access to education, don't have access to regular food, housing, medical care. And I'm going to keep agitating, saying, why are you not paying attention to this? Why are you passing this law that's preventing these folks from having the support that they need? I'm going to make sure that we keep raising our voice because it isn't beloved community if only one group is taken care of. It's when all groups are taken care of. So beloved community is far from getting global majority folks to shut up.
Thank you for that. And I love hearing your passion. And I think that some of what shows up for me is just how big this task is.
Yeah. I don't think it's going to end. And I think it's so important to, again, bring in that self-compassion. I want to see, like, if I had a magic wand, this is what I would create right now. I would create beloved community around the world, but it's not going to happen in my lifetime or my kids' lifetime. But we each start doing steps. We each start learning skills and passing it on. And so maybe, what was it? 50% of the people on the poll who said it was impossible to have these conversations. Maybe in the next generation, it'll be 5% and the next generation will be 0%. So we just have to keep working at it.
Thank you for that. So we mentioned at the beginning that there may be folks who are part of today's event who are coming from their professional environments. And so I wonder if we can shift and talk about how this plays out in organizations. So I'm wondering if you could both speak to how leaders can foster environments of safety and inclusion and begin in our organizations to see positive transformation take place.
There's such a need for leaders to really commit to this, to think about it in terms of how is their marketing done, how is their outreach done, how does their hiring, how are their hiring practices, are there hiring departments throwing out all of the resumes that have non-white names without even calling them? There's a lot of things that need to be looked at that are concrete, specific steps that people can take. And I believe they really need Roxy's dialogue process in order to be able to move forward with confidence and responsibility.
And I think for leaders, some of the actions that they can take, and we were talking about this just before the call went fully live about what happened with Krispy Kreme, right? And so some of the actions they can take is to have real initiatives around these conversations. A lot of times, and especially as I was watching what happened with Black Lives Matter, it's like something happens in the news and everyone's like, oh, we need to like poll our global majority staff and find out what's going on. And then as soon as the news cycle dies down, all of the interest goes away. So people need to put resources into saying, how can we actually truly assess what's going on in our organization, where there's been harm? How could we listen, like really have the conversation so that we can listen to the folks who are impacted about what they need? And then don't put the burden on them to get their needs met, right? What can we do? How can we show up, put the resources into making sure that those needs are actually met? So listen, assess, listen, and then take action.
So that kind of goes back to what you were saying before. We have to raise our level of awareness, and we do that through listening. But listening and beginning the conversations is not enough. We have to follow up with action.
Absolutely. And some of it is really looking at ourselves, right? Because as leaders, we're in this specific place of privilege where for a lot of leaders, like I might not tell you what's going on really for me if I want to keep my job. And especially if you've had a history of not receiving information like that with any sort of grace, it would be a really scary thing to do. So leaders might need to actually take the steps of looking at themselves and saying, how have I shut down these conversations when they needed to happen? What do I need to do to really create a culture where people trust that they can have these conversations without punishment? And how can I make amends when that hasn't happened in the past?
That's really helpful and really powerful. So the chat's been blowing up, and I know that people have a ton of questions and want to dig a little deeper. Before we go to the questions that are coming in the chat, though, I do want to just take a quick moment. I promised all of you that we would let you know a bit more about the books that are coming next week. And so I want to take a moment with you quickly to give you some more info about how to get a hold of the books. So sorry about this, taking a second to get there. All right, so we want to encourage you, if these ideas are inspiring you the way they're inspiring me, we want to encourage you to pre-order both books before they release next week on launch day, August 29th. And Barrett Kohler Publishers has some special bundle pricing that you can get. And Wendy is putting all the links in the chat. The book is available through all online retailers, but the only way to get that book bundle pricing is through the publisher Barrett Kohler. So you can get both How to Have Antiracist Conversations and the Antiracist Heart in a bundle. And so we would encourage you to do that. So there's our quick moment. And I see a ton of questions in the chat. I want to start with this interesting one that came in earlier from Karen, who was wondering about how the two of you would respond to the polls that we had at the beginning. So how often do you struggle to have those conversations, and how able are you to offer yourself self-compassion?
Well, I put my go on.
Definitely this week for struggling to find a way to speak up. And then I noticed that as I was speaking, I was blushing. I was like, even this moment. So Roxy, go ahead.
And I was saying, within the last month, I've definitely struggled to speak up with difficult conversations. And self-compassion is a little bit challenging for me at times. I've gotten lots better. If it's easy, if I don't think there's been a lot of harm, super easy. But when I think that the person has been really impacted by my actions, I still have a tendency to want to beat myself up. And so I have to put a little bit of extra effort or get support.
Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Even though my life is self-compassion, I have after effects of difficult childhood, and under stress, my internal voices go crazy, telling me that I'm bad or wrong, or just like a kind of a felt sense of yuckiness about myself. I desperately need that self-compassion. That is an important element for me, and part of my daily practice to bring it on.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm trying to scroll through the questions. We'll do our best to get to as many of these as we can. Bob is asking for some first steps to start to create a beloved community. place where all people's needs are met?
Well, one of the first steps, believe it or not, I think is to start with yourself, because so many of us, regardless of our racial ethnic identity, have been taught that we don't matter. We shouldn't have needs. We shouldn't be able to advocate for what's important for us. So start for yourself. Notice where you've been taking yourself, removing yourself from the table, and become comfortable with identifying your needs and naming them. And then the next step, one of the things I love doing actually, and this is like really little practice, but it's kind of fun and it's my excuse for watching trashy television, is I'll watch trashy television, and as I watch it, usually these shows are meant to make you have strong judgments about someone, to make you think, oh, that's the bad person. And so I'm always watching these shows and trying to unpack, what are the needs here? What's important to this person? What are they missing? What are they trying to accomplish? So that I start to have a practice really reflexive of always looking for the needs beyond whatever narrative is being put out there. If you can read some of the papers, like one of the things we know about the current society is we're very siloed. Conservatives read conservative papers, liberals read liberal newspapers. So find a newspaper on the other side and have a practice of reading it and not just dismissing what they're saying, asking yourself, what's important to this person? Why are they doing this? And what is it? How is it opposing something that I value, and what would be a strategy that would work for both of us? And it's that kind of, how can it work for the both and, not the either or, that is one of the really crucial steps towards being able to create beloved community.
That's really challenging, to put ourselves in someone else's shoes.
Mm-hmm. I love to comment in the chat. I'm going to tell my partner that's why I'm watching 90 Day Fiancé now. Absolutely. It's a good excuse for a lot of shows.
So we have a couple of questions that have come in recently regarding self-compassion. Both Amy and Tara are asking, what are your practices to cultivate self-compassion? And Tara says, or do you have any daily practices for self-compassion?
Daily practices for self-compassion are to just start really small with one breath. Because a lot of us have contracts that say we should not be compassionate with ourselves. These come from Puritan work ethics. These come from fundamentalism. These come from Catholicism. These come from culture. Like, we're not supposed to be warm with ourselves. It's selfish. It's narcissistic. We're not supposed to do it. On the contrary, all the research shows that the more compassion we have for ourselves, the more we have an easy time in the world, and the more we're able to have agency and stay active and take action and be engaged in our communities. So it's actually, paradoxically, the best thing we can do for ourselves and the least selfish thing we can do for ourselves. So knowing that, one breath a day, just start with one breath a day where you just really see if you can like yourself. Now, that might be too high a bar. You might need to have one breath a day where you're not hating yourself, but one breath a day of warmth, of like, oh, my sweetheart, you're working so hard. I love you. Just one breath, just starting with one breath changes the brain.
Well, I wonder after you do that, if then you don't want to like pour it out to someone else.
What a wonderful thing. Pouring it out to other people is fabulous as well.
Roxy, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I love this question about self-compassion, because that's the thing that I've struggled with most of my life. And this month, I started this new self-compassion practice that's been amazing. A really dear friend, his sibling and his sibling's partner, we exchange a text every single day where we say 6 things, 6 little loves, 6 things we appreciate about ourselves during the day. And it's a practice of looking at even behaviors that I would have normally judged. It's like I had a candy bar and recognizing, I chose that candy bar. I let myself have a candy bar because it actually was soothing. It helped me like ground. Or I took a walk outside, and just having to think about, what are my 6 things that I'm going to do that are really about self-love and really holding myself with care, has really broadened both my attention to this and how often I'm now choosing self-compassion. So I really love this idea.
Well, I don't know if you'd be willing, but will you like do it in front of us? Like, can you tell us your 6 things, like maybe your 6 things from yesterday?
Okay, I'm going to grab my phone and see what I wrote, and wow, how vulnerable. Yeah, but sure.
You don't have
Of course,
to.
no, I'm a choice. I'm always a choice. So my 6 things from yesterday. Oh, wow. Yesterday was a tough day for me. So I got up early to get ready for work with more spaciousness instead of sleeping until the very last minute. I took time to reconnect with colleagues. I've been really busy. So just like saying I have to work instead of connection is important. And I kept an agreement to go to the theater, choosing connection over work. I appreciated my willingness to notice when I'm feeling self-judgment and interrupt the negative self-talk with at least one positive observation. That was one of my self-compassion practices. And I asked for several modifications to an illustration that I was working with until I was satisfied, which was usually I would just say, oh, it's fine. And I wouldn't really connect to my needs. I would judge myself as too picky. So those were some of my 6 things.
That is amazing. And I don't know if you see all these hearts coming up on the
I do.
screen. And I'm so grateful that you were willing to be vulnerable, and to model for us what that could look like. And judging just by all the hearts that are still flying and by all the comments in the chat, what a powerful thing to be able to do those 6 things. Michelle said, thank you for your vulnerability and generosity in sharing this with us. Roxy, gift received. So here's a question from Donna Joy. Is it okay and self-compassionate to take oneself out of a situation when we feel our needs are not being considered by the other people?
Can I take this one, Sarah? Yes, 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 absolutely. And this is one of the challenges that I have when people think about bringing nonviolent communication and beloved community into anti-racism work. There's this idea that if I'm believing these things, if I'm trying to create beloved community, that I have to always be available for connection, for interactions with people, even when they're harming me. And when I think about beloved community means you hold your needs as well. How is it holding your needs if you let yourself be harmed? So being able to say, hey, absolutely, I cannot do this with you. I don't have the capacity, I don't have the skills, I don't have the energy, I don't have the resources to be in this dialogue with you is self-compassionate. The way that we do this, though, that's not perpetuating some of the old paradigm is I'm doing it without blaming you. I'm not saying, you are too evil and hard and therefore I'm bouncing. I'm not going to be with you. I'm not judging you. I'm just saying I don't have the capacity to be in this dialogue right now. So I'm going to go take care of myself and not be in this with you. And that is an essential part of anti-racism work. There's no demand that I have to make myself available to you just because I want to do this work.
And I heard you say earlier, like you're always at choice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have anything you want to add, Sarah?
Oh, I love Roxy's answer.
All right. Here's a question from DV. How do you answer old-timer parents who have, and this is in quotation marks, colonial attitude that lighter skin and green or blue eyes are better than me? I cannot tell you how damaging this was all my life, even though I am highly educated and had a good career.
I think this one's for you, Roxy.
Yeah. So, first, just let me say, like, the pain that I'm hearing in that question of not ever receiving appreciation and acknowledgement and just wholehearted embracing from your parents just because of the color of your skin. So I want to acknowledge that. And before I ever tell someone, like, here's what I would say, the first question for me is, you need to decide, do you want to have this conversation with your parents? Because part of it is that you will try, you will start, and they might not be able to receive you. They might not hear you. And if you connect with yourself and say, it's important for me to speak up because I want to be known, even if they don't get it, then you might have that conversation. If you decide that I can only have this conversation if they're able to hear me, maybe you're going to need support. Maybe you're going to need someone else who can give them empathy, who can support them in whatever pain's going to come up if they can actually understand you so that they can reflect back what's important to you. So first check in. What's going to be important to you? And what are you hoping to get out of having this dialogue with your parents? And then if you want to have this conversation with them, I would start by being vulnerable, being really vulnerable. And it might be something like, Mom, I came to celebrate the promotion that I got at work. And when I heard your response was, well, cousin down the road who's lighter skinned, is so beautiful. And I was completely ignored about the celebration I was bringing, I felt heartbroken because I'm not trusting that you see me for all of the gifts that I have, and instead that somehow you're still believing that lightness, skin color, is what's going to give us movement and power in our society. And I'm wondering if you can reflect back what you think I'm longing for from you when I come to you with these celebrations. Or could you reflect back why it's hard for me when I hear you talk about someone else's skin color when I don't have that skin color? So just name what's going on for you, name the pain, and ask for a reflection back. What are they getting from this?
That's powerful. Thank you. There are so many questions. I'm trying to get to all of them. If you have a really pressing question that we're missing, please feel free to put it back in the chat, and we'll try to circle back to it. I do have a question. Can you offer insights on how to navigate people who might be gaslighting or denying your needs, and how can you navigate that with self-compassion?
Oh, this happens all the time. This is like one of the most common responses that we'll get when we try to bring vulnerability forward. Because when we bring vulnerability forward, people get uncomfortable and they want to make it go away. So if we're speaking about impact, a way that we've been impacted, then the other person's body will often clench and they'll go into an automatic dismissal. Oh, you're oversensitive, you're reacting, it was a joke, you don't take me seriously, like a whole kind of a smoke screen in a way that comes out of people that prevents them from actually owning their responsibility and their impact. So I loved when Roxy was demonstrating in this sample dialogue with the parents saying, could you reflect back to me what you think is important to me? And those kinds of questions are what we learn in How to Have Antiracist Conversations, this beautiful book that Roxy's written. And it will give you forms and examples and models that will help you in this very interesting and loving way persist and reach for relationship over and over again, as long as you're not exhausted, as long as you don't need to go off and have a nap and rest and just not talk to anybody contentious for about 2 years. It's just fine. Whatever you need. But when you're moved by that, when you're moved by somebody was asking, what the heck, how the heck do we have connection then if we're going off and resting? We let ourselves be moved by the love for a beloved community. This becomes a fuel within us when we get connected to what we really want in the world. Roxy, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, and the gaslighting is such a challenging one. And it's related to what you said, Sarah. I always tell people that, you can't ever win with the "I didn't mean this" or "you misunderstood me" comeback, because how can you prove that they didn't mean it? Like, you can't prove it. So instead, I take the focus away from them and I say, you know what? It doesn't matter what you believed or what you were trying to do. But if you could imagine that for whatever reason, this is what I understood and it impacted me in this way, what do you think would be going on for me? What do you think I would be needing if I've been impacted in this way, whether or not you intended for me to have impact? So this is just going back to helping people refocus on the impact, whether or not it was their intention, as the most important thing. And then the gaslighting doesn't matter.
Yeah, that is such a powerful thing to invite. What do you think matters to me in this moment?
Yeah.
That is really powerful. So from Kathy, we have anti-racist equity work centers on lifting opportunities for all. So do you have any best or promising practice suggestions when doing anti-racist work and talking to individuals who continually assert that their group should be prioritized over another?
I missed the question. I'm so sorry.
No worries. So practice suggestions when people just continue to say that their group should be prioritized. Like, how do you continue to move the anti-racist work forward?
Right. Oh, and this is so challenging because it's coming from this idea of scarcity, right? That my group has to be prioritized because there's not enough to go around. And that's one of the ways that white supremacy thinking continues to maintain itself in the world. And so I like the idea of thinking about, okay, if you want your group to be prioritized, I also want your group to be prioritized, but I also want my group to be prioritized. I want everyone to have what they need. So could we come up with strategies where whatever choices we're making sure that it's really holding the whole, not one or the other, but really holding the whole. So that would be one piece that I think is really important to me. Another piece is you get to choose as a person who's doing work in the community, you get to choose how much I'm walking along with somebody and when do I need to separate. And there is enough resources in the world that if you decide that you only want to have your group thrive, go for it. I trust that it'll be okay and that I can also separate and work on what's going to support some of the causes I care about if you're not able to join me without putting you down, without demonizing you. And so giving yourself permission to say we don't always have to be marching in lockstep just because we're on the same path. We can separate, we can still access the abundant resources that actually exist.
That's helpful. This late question, many people actually don't believe they are racist. How do we break those barriers and lack of awareness?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about how there's kind of a progression of learning, a progression of protest and learning. Because for so many of us, we were raised with the civil rights struggle in the background, with the example of water hoses and dogs being set on people who were protesting, who were just looking for the vote, for goodness sake. And we were so clear that we were anti-racist. You know, we do not put dogs on people. We do not use fire hoses. But we did not understand that we were part of this system of white supremacy that's just been sickeningly embedded in our matrix from as we've been learning with the 1691 Project, like from the very effing beginning. So there's a progression of learning and protest that happens for people who think, I'm not racist, this has nothing to do with me. And I think that sharing our own journey of discovery is a way that helps people to open their hearts. Like, yeah, that was where I started too. That's what I said too. And then I start to learn about the system and the way that I'm a part of it. And, that's one way. Roxy, do you have other thoughts here?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there's something you were saying about connecting to our journey and being really transparent about it. And it's also recognizing that white supremacy is not like a white person only problem, and it's not a global majority person problem. We all are harmed by it. And the more that we can see ourselves as victims of this ideology and recognize the ways that it's harmed us, the more likely we are to want to change it. And I think so often the dialogue is around, this is bad because it hurts only global majority folks, and we don't acknowledge the ways that it actually harms and has decimated the white community as well. So it's how can we actually find the ways to see our shared impact of this and work together to free all of us from this continued impact.
Thank you for that. Karen is asking, how can we open connection with white nationalists who don't want this and believe in violence?
So this is a really tricky one, because one of the things that's really important to me is that we don't put ourselves in harm's way unless we're intentionally choosing to do so with a clear purpose. So if someone is known for really espousing violence, I want to have a really clear understanding about why I would want to be in conversation with that person. And I just want to name, some people need to be. Those white supremacists will never be reached unless somebody's willing to engage with them and have those conversations. But it's not like there's no shit about it. There's no, I need to be willing to let myself be murdered and have my children be parentless so that I can have these conversations. So that's the first piece I always like to start off with. The second piece is to start off by doing your own inner work. Are you seeing them as evil, bad, horrible people? Or are you seeing them as part of the ultimate victims of this ideology, as people who've learned that the only way that they can learn that they matter is to believe that they are better than another group of people? And are we looking at the ways that both that they benefit from believing in this ideology and the ways that they're harmed? Are we looking at what are they missing? What are they so desperately yearning for that they've adopted an ideology that society is pretty clearly saying is wrong, right? And they're still doing it. So there's some benefit that they're getting from there. And so if I can access this degree of compassion, which is different from saying I'm okay with what they're doing, right? I'm just saying I'm compassionate. I'm understanding some of the moves that they're making, even as I say that is not okay and I don't want you to do it. But I want to lead with that compassion. There's a really great article for those of you, it's old now, but there's a great article in Mother Jones magazine called Addicted to Hate that I always have people read. And it's an article that talks about a white supremacist who talks about what it took for him to leave that movement. And part of what it took for him to leave was acceptance. Because every time people judged him, he doubled down. It's like, if I'm looking for belonging, if I'm looking for community, and you're judging me, well, I'm not going to find it there. So why am I going to do what you're telling me to do? So he would just double down in being more and more entrenched in these beliefs. But when people started embracing him and saying, we understand what you're doing, we understand what you're looking for, he was finally able to leave. And I think that's part of what we need to do, is to start to wonder, what needs are they meeting? And what are some ways that I can help them meet these needs in a different way that's not costly to me and not so costly to my community, and still helps them in a way that's useful.
What a generous way of looking at it.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
But it's also, I want to say, it's also not that we don't all have to do it. There are some folks who will do it and some folks who can't, and that's okay also.
We are always at choice.
Yeah.
So as we come to the end of the hour, and there's so many great questions, we will make sure the questions get in front of Roxy and in front of Sarah. But I do want to remind you that these books will be available next week. Launch day is August 29th. And so just a quick side note, in addition to buying the books, which we hope you'll do, once you've read the books, one of the best ways that you can be helpful to spreading this important message in the world is to write Amazon reviews, and to also share either this event or these books or any other related content with your online community. So one of the things that we can all do is to start to speak up in online spaces and to share these resources with others. So I want to ask you, if you've gained benefit from this hour, to not only support the authors by buying the book, buying the books, buying both of them, and not only by reading them and continuing to learn and move forward on your own learning journey, but also to choose to share this content with others. So as we wrap up the hour, I know, Roxy, that you and Sarah have some parting thoughts to leave with us.
Yeah, I think my first parting thought is trust yourself. So many of us are afraid to actually step into these spaces to have these conversations. I'm going to do harm. I'm going to make it worse. Just trust yourself. Trust that you can do it over as much as you need to, that you can continuously move towards repair and reconnection. And it's much more important that you start, that you try, than that you don't try at all.
And as you go, just be so warm with yourself and see if you can just have affection for yourself, even for just one breath a day.
Thank you both. So I'm going to stop sharing live on Facebook, and I'm going to stop the recording. And we're going to stay on for a few